Alright, y'all, so today I'm going to do a very quick review of Ultimate Avengers 2. This was the sequel to Ultimate Avengers. Both of these were released pretty much one after another in 2006, but obviously this is kind of the immediate follow-up to the first Ultimate Avengers. Now, like I said in my previous video, probably even more so with this one, I have a lot of nostalgia for this one. I think one of the earliest DVDs I ever remember getting as a kid was this one. I think in general, besides some other like Marvel movies in the 2000s like Ang Lee's Hulk or the 2005 Fantastic Four, this movie, for whatever reason, I don't know how, just ended up in my sphere of movies I watched. And I had the DVD for the longest time, and I watched it. And this one I remember a lot more than I do the first one as a kid, to be frank. So I have a lot of nostalgia for this one. Now, going into it, I liked the first one decent enough. I think there was a lot of really good stuff and elements. It wasn't perfect by all means, and it could have been a lot better. But going into Ultimate Avengers 2, I was kind of curious what the heck this movie is going to be about because it's been a while since I've seen it. And, well, I will say this. It is definitely doing its own thing. You know, while the first movie had some similarities to the Ultimates, which is obviously what these movies are based on, this one barely has anything to do with the Ultimates. I mean, there's some things here and there you can arguably say make a reference to what happens in Ultimates 2 and stuff. And as far as I remember, I think when this movie was coming out, Ultimates 2 was still ongoing, so it wasn't a complete story they were able to fall back on. So they just kind of completely did their own thing in this one, and it's mostly its own thing. I mean, yeah, obviously it's based on the Ultimate Universe, but I mean, it doesn't really resemble the storyline from Ultimates 2 as far as I can remember. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, but like all my other reviews, my initial opinions of this movie, I think it's better than the first one. I think it's a solid movie. It's a good Marvel animated film. And even though it was direct-to-video, I think the quality of this one is actually a little bit better than the first one. There's a lot of things that this one does right, and I think overall it's a pretty solid movie. So I'm going to give you my pros, my cons, and my overall opinions like always. So let's get into the pros. The animation quality. Now, I like the animation quality in the first one, and obviously, since this is basically back-to-back, the quality is similar, right? I mean, it's pretty good for the most part. It's got that kind of shaded style, that kind of, simplistic character design. And I like it more enough than I did in the first one. I will say that I wish there was a little bit more of a detailed style. Maybe they could have went a little bit closer to Brian Hitch's artworks from the Ultimates. Just maybe kind of came with the style of animation and detail with the characters similar to that. But the animation is good enough. The quality is decent enough, and there's a lot of things this movie does right. The Ultimates have formed up in this version, obviously, by the point of the second movie. And this is also a Black Panther origin movie in a lot of ways, which I don't know if Black Panther even shows up in the Ultimate Universe. I could be mistaken, but we get to see T'Challa, we get to see Wakanda. We basically have a little bit of an origin story here for Black Panther. And it's pretty cool stuff. I really enjoy it. And I thought his whole storyline and arc in this was pretty well done. I also like the fact that Kaiser comes back as the main villain. Obviously, he was the big threat in Ultimates Volume 2 and the big threat of the first movie somewhat. So it was nice to see that all kind of come around and he finally gets somewhat defeated at the end. Especially how he kills T'Challa's father. He's even more of a villain in this one than it was in the first movie. And I think it's really good. I also think the pacing and the narrative choices here are just more focused than they were in the first movie. The first movie doesn't have a lot of action. It's a bunch of it's basically an origin movie. Teaming up, getting the Ultimates or the Avengers together. And then by the end of the movie, it all kind of culminates in a 15-minute battle. Here, they're already formed up, and that's really good. And I think the pacing and the narrative choices here is better than the first movie as well. Captain America kind of goes through an arc here. He's, kind of beating himself up over things, taking mission after mission, really doing a toll on himself. And he has to go through the arc to kind of accept who he is and by the end he kind of does. And I will say that the arc with his character is pretty decent. I do think it kind of gets resolved way too quickly. Like, I felt like the conclusion to it was a little bit weird, and it could have been handled better, but overall it's okay. I also thought the giant man dying at the end of this was really interesting. I thought that he was a complete prick in the first one. Here he's a complete prick, but I felt like his redemption arc felt at least a little bit more natural. And obviously Giant Man is way more honorable in the Ultimate Avengers movies than he ever was in the Ultimates, which I already mentioned in my first video. But if you don't know, in those comics, he verbally and physically basically tortures and beats up Janet, his wife. He runs away. Captain America finds him, beats the shit out of a naked giant man, Hank Pym. And then Hank kind of just sort of hides around, and he kind of helps out the bad guys, I think in Ultimates too, a little bit. And then he just kind of doesn't do anything. I think he does get killed in Ultimatum. In this movie, he has a much more honorable death, and something that I've always felt like is really, like, I think I've always felt like his death is something that I guess I didn't really see coming as a kid, and I still kind of am a little bit shocked they actually did it. But I felt like that his arc with him becoming a better person and dying at the end felt honorable, and it felt natural, and he basically became a good person, a hero by the end, which is obviously a lot better than he was in the actual Ultimate comics. I also like Iron Man here. He's pretty cool. He gets the War Machine armor, which, happens in the comics, even though most of the time Rhodey's the one wearing it, because he's basically a War Machine. But, it's interesting Tony is having it, so that's pretty cool stuff. But yeah, I like the T'Challa stuff. It's really a Black Panther movie, but that's pretty cool stuff. I like the T'Chari here. We get more information about them. We also get a little bit more background on them, which was one of my complaints of the first movie. You don't really get too much background on them. Here you get a little bit more background, which is pretty cool stuff. I am kind of surprised, too, they didn't introduce characters like Hawkeye and the incest Quicksilver and Wanda, the sister and brother, because, yes, in the Ultimate Universe, Wanda and Quicksilver are together like that. Why? Don't ask me. Especially if you ever get to reading the Ultimates 3. I really feel sorry for anyone who has to read that comic. What a pitifully horrible comic from that universe. But I'm kind of glad that they're not in this movie. So that's pretty cool stuff. And, I don't think they would have added much to the plot anyway here. But, yeah, the animation's good. The action also, I think, has a big step up here. There's a lot more action in this movie. I think half of it is action. It's a big worldwide battle against the T'Chari, and that's pretty cool stuff. Obviously, it takes a lot of cues. At least the Avengers film in 2012 took a lot of cues from this, specifically with Iron Man rushing to the heart of the giant weapon, kind of similar to what Tony did at the end of the first Avengers movie. Kind of weird how all these things line up, but yeah, pretty cool stuff. I like the action. The action feels nice and fast and world-ending. Pretty cool stuff. I liked how certain characters get a little bit of resolution. I did like the scene where Betty said, "I love you" to Bruce, something that I think she didn't say in the first one or the second, but here it felt very natural. And honestly, as we know as an audience, we knew Bruce didn't die, but it was pretty cool regardless. A nice emotional moment. It's pretty cool. I do like how Black Panther and Cap both defeated Kaiser, excuse me, and he turns into a giant monster, and they kind of just, I guess, freeze him to death. Pretty cool stuff. And, there's just a lot of really good action in this movie. Hulk's in it, too. I will say I was a bit disappointed how he doesn't really show up in this one. Obviously, Bruce Banner's dealing with the aftermath of what he did in the first movie, and I thought that was decently well done, especially compared to the comics, which I don't want to get flashbacks of that scene where Betty's talking to Bruce and how she gets turned on about eating people. Bruce eating people, the Hulk, creepy stuff. And I guess there's some obvious comparisons. This is kind of, in a lot of ways, a loose adaptation of Ultimates 2, but really Ultimates Volume 2. And obviously there's some huge benefits with this one being watered down and sanitized. Hulk is obviously a lot more manageable. I read some comments that Hulk, I will say this, I am disappointed Hulk didn't have really too much to do in this, which I'm going to kind of get into my cons a little bit now. I will say this, Hulk doesn't have a lot to do in this movie, and I kind of wish he had a lot more to do. He kind of shows up at the end, and then we don't really get to see him destroy a lot of stuff. I think it would have been really awesome if they like dropped Hulk in Wakanda or something where it's like he could like basically get to destroy Kleiser, absolutely ripped him apart like in the comic. Though I do not want a scene where Hulk eats the main villain and poops him out. I don't want to see that. I don't think anyone wants to see that. I don't want to see a cannibal Hulk in a kid's movie, okay? I saw some comments saying, oh, Hulk was so cool in the Ultimates Volume 2 comic. Yeah, he was cool, but he said some of the stupidest stuff ever Hulk has ever said, and he eats the main villain. I mean, like, what? Pretty crazy stuff. But yeah, I wish Hulk had more screen time. And I feel like Captain America's arc, like I already mentioned, it felt a bit underdeveloped. I don't know, there's something about it where it's like he kind of like is dealing with a lot of stuff. He's overworking himself. He's kind of scared that if he, loses someone or he, slows down, so to speak, to have a normal life, that he, in some ways will lose his life or something like that. And he kind of resolves that conflict by the end, comes to terms with who he is and accepts the future in his new life. But I felt like the resolution to that felt very half-baked. I don't know. Maybe there's just something a little unnatural to it. But it was pretty cool. I did like the scenes with her and Natasha. I just wish that there was more development into that arc. And, I also think Thor is kind of sparingly used in this movie. I wish he had more development and screen time here. He's kind of similar to how he was in the first movie. He has a bit more to do here, but I think, especially considering that he was a big focus of Ultimates 2, and how, whether or not is he a god or not, which by the end he is, obviously. I kind of wish that maybe they would have incorporated that element into it. I mean, who knows, if they ever made an Ultimate Avengers 3, that could have been the focus of it. I'm not exactly sure, but I wish he had a little bit more to do in this movie. But yeah, and like I already mentioned before, I kind of wish the art style was more similar to the comic Ultimates, and maybe they could have included a few more moments like from the comic. Like, for example, one of my favorite scenes from the comic was the Jatari kind of trick the Ultimates to going to this island and they detonate it. I wish there was a trap scene like that in one of these movies, either the first or the second one. Most likely in this one. That would have been really cool. They could have somehow incorporated in that. And obviously, pacing-wise, they could have probably increased the length of this and made it a bit longer. But I feel like the pacing is still a lot better than it was in the first movie. But to kind of quickly wrap up my thoughts on Ultimates Avengers 2, I think while it obviously is hugely different from the source material, it's really not like Ultimates 2 at all. And it really just kind of goes off and does its own thing. I think overall it's a better direct-to-video Marvel animated film than the first one. I think it really knows more what it wants to be. It's an interesting movie. It showcases Black Panther a bit more, which is awesome. The character moments feel more developed and fleshed out here. And while not everything sticks to landing and has a natural, awesome conclusion, I think this is a better movie than the first one. I think it really handles itself better. The action's better. And I think that its conclusion is also pretty well done. So overall, even though they would never make another Ultimates Avengers movies, which I've always felt was a shame, this is still a really solid sequel that improves upon the faults of the first one. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Ultimate Avengers 2. Hopefully you all have a good day, and peace, y'all.